Welcome to the Borgen podcast, the only English language podcast about fictional Danish politics. On our show, we explore the people, events, and parties that make up the fictional Danish parliament on Borgen. I'm one of your hosts, Amy, coming to you from Istanbul, Turkey, and I am, as always, joined by my good friend and co-host, Chantal, who broadcasts from her room with a fabulous view in Toronto, Canada. And this episode is, again, a kind of bonus episode. It's on topic of Borgen. We're going to talk about characters. We spent one episode before recording this one talking about the women of the summer of 2023. That includes Taylor Swift and Barbie. And for this episode, we're going to talk about the men of Borgen, at least some of them. And then Chantal's going to lead another episode on some more men of Borgen. I think that's how we're going to do it. Just to keep the time limit, somewhat appropriate for our listeners, because we just did a super long episode. We don't want to hit you with a series of super long episodes all at once. So the men I'm going to talk about are the three men who are probably closest to Brigitte. So Bent, and then Philip, and then Kasper. And let's start with Bent.
Well, we're going to, first of all, we want to talk about some tweets, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, sorry.
We want to say hello to all of our listeners, the new listeners that are joining us for the first time today, and the old listeners that have been with us every episode. Hello, thank you for being here. We see you on social media. We appreciate all your interaction with us. We like hearing from listeners. And I want to read out a few tweets from some of you, which we really enjoyed. And I've changed some of the names on the handles because I didn't ask any of you your permission, though Twitter is a public space. I did change your names a little bit. So someone named Mary has written to us. She's sent us a bunch of tweets. The ones that I'm going to read are, she says, I love that you called Svendage Saltum a favorite villain, exclamation mark. And we appreciate that comment because we really liked Svendage, and we had a lot to say about him throughout the episodes that we recorded. She also says, thank you for accompanying me on a 600-mile round trip by car from Scotland to England. She says, you are so right. Brigitte looks so nice even when riding a bike. So thank you for choosing us to be with you, even though Amy and I'm stationed in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and Amy is in Istanbul. We're so glad that our voices can be with you on your
Seriously, you took a car ride with us for that long? I'm very impressed.
Yes. We hope we were funny and entertaining and informative. A professor wrote to us and says, OMG, there's a podcast? Exclamation mark, question mark.
I think,
yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, at this point, there's probably a podcast on everything.
But not Borgen. I think we're the only ones that have a Borgen podcast. And how it started very quickly in the pandemic. Amy and I are very social, outgoing people. But in the pandemic, we were in a lockdown. We had just finished watching Borgen and felt very lonely. We were talking to each other. We're like, oh my God, we've got so many ideas and things to say. I'm sure there's other people like us. Why don't we start a podcast about Borgen as our pandemic project? So that's what we did. We learned everything there was to learn, and we're still learning. So thanks for being with us.
Yes, and we are kind of slow in recording these days. Everything is very, very busy. Of course, now everything's sort of back to normal life pace. So that's why there are long gaps. Like I spent most of this summer at home organizing my life. So I wasn't able to be available for recording. I didn't even stop in Toronto because my family's elsewhere in Canada. And that was even unusual for me. So things are, it just depends on how things go. So apologies for big gaps between episodes, but we get them to you. They're coming.
Yeah, they're coming. Someone named Liz wrote to us and says, I love your podcast, and I especially, in capitals, she writes especially, love the bits where you go off topic because it's always interesting and insightful. When you finished Borgen, please just do one where you chat. Loads of men do it.
We just did one. We just did an episode. But that may happen. That could happen.
That could happen. But we still have lots of content to go because we have to finish season 3 of Borgen, and then we have to go through Power and Glory. So yeah, that's going to take us some time. Someone by the name of Susan wrote to us with a series of points, but I've shortened it to say, point number 1, the series pointed out repeatedly what happens when ego or self-interest get in the way of the public interest or doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Second point was, it is so important that people in high pressured positions have people to turn to as a release valve.
Yes.
Third point was, establishing work-life balance is hard. Also, we see that it can mean different things to different people. Brigitte, Philip, Torben, Katrine, Kasper, and several other characters found themselves at the wrong side of it at times.
Yes.
Next point, she says, it's really important to communicate well. It's particularly crucial to do so when the public is worried, uncertain and or in disagreement with your view, which I think is very true.
Yeah.
If a politician has an opinion that is not jiving with the citizens, they need to come out and still show some communication. And what are my options? Always ask, what are my options? Think like you are Bent, who is going to be one of your men you're profiling today.
Yes.
And we are going to break this up into three and three. So Amy's going to go first on this episode and talk about her 3 men, and then we're going to have a discussion, and then in the next episode we release, we'll talk about the 3 men that I'm profiling. But before we get into Amy's conversation, I want to just read an email, and I hope listeners, if you can offer some help or guidance, you'll get in touch with us. So this is someone named Jana, a listener from Brussels, in the heart of EU politics, she says, has written to us, and she's asked about Brigitte's earrings from season 1. She says, I really like listening to you. It's so engaging and wholesome. I can sit in a nice cafe and listen to your conversations and analysis, very hugely, as the Danes will say. I absolutely love the show Borgen. And she says, and this is where we want audience feedback, if you know, she says, I'm particularly interested and obsessed with Brigitte Newborg's jewelry. I've desperately Googled for hours to try and find out which brand she wears, but was unable to find anything. Therefore, I'm hoping you might know more. Brigitte wears gold drop earrings with 4 little pearls and a black stone in the middle. Sometimes it looks like she wears them in wears a similar pair in silver with 4 pearls going north, south, east, and west, and a blue stone in the center. Many thanks for all your wonderful work. Best wishes. So we would love to help you, Jana. If anyone in the Borgen podcast community knows, get in touch with us by email at theborgenpodcast@gmail.com and let us know. We will put that information.
Yeah. I have no idea who even did costume design. Like, I haven't even looked that up, but that might be the way to find out. But I also have noticed that interesting jewelry too. I kind of wonder where people get stuff. I often notice that kind of thing on shows, like, where did they get that piece of set design business, or like that bit of jewelry or that accessory? Yeah. And people's apartments. I pay a lot of attention to people's apartments. Yeah. Like characters' apartments on shows. It's really fun for me to do that. Actually.
Yeah, because everything has to be purposely put there, right? You start in a blank studio or in a blank room, and how do you populate it?
Yeah, that's production design. It's a really cool job. Speaking of podcasting and production design, You Must Remember This, which is a really, really good podcast about the history of Hollywood in the 20th century, run by Katrina Longsworth. She did a whole series on Polly Platt, who was a pretty famous production designer and a partner of Peter Bogdanovich at a certain point in her life, and was responsible for like a lot of very famous and very big name films, but a lot of people don't know her name. So if you're interested in production design and what that is, go check that out. I'm plugging a lot of other podcasts on our show lately, and I'm enjoying doing that. I do not mind that.
You're talking about professional podcasts, and we're not a professional podcast.
Yeah, we're talking about real people. Yeah.
If you go listen to other people's podcasts, but come back to us because we like talking to you and sharing.
There's time for everyone, right?
That's right.
So I'm going to talk about Bent. So some of those tweets actually play into, kind of how Bent functions in Brigitte's life. So he is the one who initially advises her that she's capable of becoming PM. At the very first episode of the first season, he's the one who takes her up into they go up a tower and they look out over the vista and they look at all the pictures of the old prime ministers. And he talks about like what the moderates have stood for and how, what leadership means to him, which is, it's not, a little lapdog that jumps into your lap and that you can sit and pet. You have to like grab it and hold on to it strongly. And, he plays a role that's almost symbolic. I read a pretty good article in the AV Club blog. I found an article, I was just Googling around, and I found this article by Sonia Saraya. I think that's how you pronounce her name, or Saraya. I'm not sure, but that's how it's spelled. Saraya. Saraiya, sorry. And she points out in her article that towards the end of season 1, when Bent and her are kind of clashing, right? As her responsibilities as prime minister grow after her initial campaign is very successful and Bent acts as her mentor and advisor through that, they kind of start arguing and they start having some disagreements. And in the article, it says like basically he pushes her out of her comfort zone and mentions that her ambitions, her vision for what good government is something that the common people have kind of forgotten. And then when she begins to push him away, by the beginning or middle, almost the end of season 2, I think it is, she tries to send him away to Brussels. Like she wants to just send him off and not deal with him anymore. And we see this, she becomes so cold to him that even when he comes to her office and Magnus is there with remember the mean secretary, and she won't even give him the right kind of soda. Mm-hmm. It's so mean. That woman made me so angry, the way she dealt with Magnus, little Magnus.
Yeah.
And, she says he has to make an appointment to see her. And that's just like so painful to see.
Yeah.
Because it shows this like, she's like lost her way. And then, he gets sick. He has this aneurysm. It could be mortal. He becomes very ill. And in the article, it's pointed out like, she's distancing himself from not just Bent, but everything Bent represents. Her past emotional vulnerability and a sense of justice and her ideological basis. She's making more and more compromises as the series moves further. She's dealing with like people like Jaap Kruse and Krona and like all of these, kind of people with completely different ideas than her, and trying to like cater to them to get some help to boost her government. But then he gets sick and he almost dies. And it's like her relationship with herself and her origin story is almost broken at that point. And so that's kind of interesting. I thought that was a very interesting take. And it's one that really rang true for me. But eventually they, fall back together, and he helps her reconnect back to kind of her more idealistic roots. And later on in season 3, when she makes her own party, he doesn't want to join it at first. He thinks she's going too far out on a limb. He doesn't think it's a good idea. He thinks she's going to be setting herself up for some kind of big failure. And eventually what's that?
He was selling out the moderates.
Yeah, selling them out.
Representing like the old moderates.
Yeah. And he does represent that old school kind of, mid 20th century as like this kind of Scandinavian social democratic ideology that we kind of idealize in North America. At least I idealize it. And, you know, and like as I've watched this show has been instrumental in like helping me actually understand how more complex European politics actually work with governments that have you know, a large number of parties, and there's a lot of coalitions. There's a lot of minority governments. Working in a coalition actually functions better because more voices get heard, and the compromise includes more ideas. And I think that's actually something that's quite valuable. And I'm sure there are people who would disagree with me, but that's fine. And, you know, as politics globally kind of start swinging to the right, which they seem to be doing right now, much to my great, you know, concern. Yeah, I don't like that at all. It's quite concerning. And, you know, I would prefer a bent, a voice like that somewhere, or an ideology like that coming back to the forefront. But eventually, of course, he does join her party as an advisor and a mentor. And part of the thing that I love about the way he's introduced in the series is he's just there. And we see them together, and it's like very obvious that, like, I don't know what the relationship between the two actors was like, but it's certainly, and the actor's name is something I forgot. Is it Lars Knudsen? I think it is. But he's very good. I really like this actor. I think he's great. And they're together when they're together, it's like you can feel that these characters know each other and have this established relationship. And that's just either a result of the acting skill or the writing skill, or a combination. And it just like, it was so pleasing to me. And he's like this familial, supportive, intelligent, balanced mentor. And he's never condescending. He's never dominating. He's never a mansplainer. He never assumes that Brigitte doesn't have what it takes to do things on her own. He's there. He really is an advisor. He is there to give his ideas about, you know, if you choose this, this might happen. If you choose that, that might happen. Like the phrase we saw from our tweets, what are your options? What are your options? Where's the most functional solution going to come from? Yeah. In the episode, the African episode, right, where they're negotiating a peace treaty. North and South Karun, where they're negotiating the peace treaty. Bent is instrumental in arranging that. Yeah. And at that point, he proves his worth again to Brigitte, and he is invaluable. He's the one who convinces one of the leaders to stay in Copenhagen and, you know, work out this treaty. And it's just so well done. Yeah. And and the other thing that never happens between them is there's never a suggestion of a romance. No. And despite the fact, like, he's an older actor, he's not a quote unquote leading man. He doesn't look like the actor who plays Philip or Kasper, for example. But in a differently handled or differently written program, he might be, quote unquote, more conventionally attractive. And that might be an issue between them. Yeah, or not being conventionally attractive and still that in Hollywood stories, right? Like real stories where these people in power, they just can't wait to get your trust so that they can squash you or do what they want with you, and make the woman feel as though she can't do anything without him. Right? Yeah, exactly. It's not like that. It's not like that in Borgen. No, it's a truly egalitarian relationship. It is a true and supportive friendship relationship. Yeah, and it's really interesting also that, like, as far as friends go, Brigitte doesn't have a lot of friends. We don't see an episode where she goes out to lunch with her girlfriends and explains her problems, which I think is kind of unrealistic. I think that's, but what do I know about being a female politician? We talked about that in other episodes as well. Of our podcast, that it's strange that actually none of these people have friends. We don't see any of them with friends, right? And this is what one of these tweets says when this person that tweeted us says it's so important that people in high pressure positions have people to turn to as a release valve.
none of these people have that. But also the
Not
type
that we
of
see.
work, not that we see, but also the type of work that they're in is so demanding and demands a lot of it's high pressure, but it demands a lot of your time, that they don't have time
Yeah.
to literally have girls' night. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they're married, all of them are married to their jobs.
Yeah. It's like being a teacher. You know, try to get a middle-aged teacher out on a Friday night and be like, but it's Friday.
Yeah, and you have an
You-
early start the next day.
Oh, on Saturdays? No, Saturday's but like Friday night, you're like done. You're like spent. Like
Yeah.
your social energy is used up. You know, it's
you want
really
to just
tricky.
do your own thing.
Yeah, for sure. Or like, you know, on other shows where there's a high pressure profession, like when I was living in Toronto, we watched in our girls' nights, which was awesome. We watched Mad Men and The Wire.
Yeah.
And you don't see the cops in The Wire hanging out with anybody except other cops. You know, like they don't have friends necessarily outside the job. And it's same with Mad Men.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
true. It's true. I could say even in my own career, I mean, I had a 15-year career in biomedical research. I lived at the lab. My
yeah,
friends were my lab mates. We ran
yeah,
long experiments together. We would go out in that time to have dinner together, have a drink together, come back to the lab and finish work. What excess time did I have for friends either?
yeah,
Just
yeah,
these people become your chosen friends, whether you like it or not, because you're constantly together.
yeah, exactly. And I just like to see a male female professional friendship and trustworthy mentorship here. It's so unusual. I can't think of another TV show where that exists, actually. I can't
Okay,
think of
I
one.
will say, okay, in Mad Men, what comes to mind
Yes.
is Don Draper and
And
Joan.
Peggy. Oh, Joan. Yeah.
Joan too. They never had a romance.
Nope.
And
Are you kidding? No way. Joan would never.
I think the better example of that is what you just said, is Peggy, Elizabeth Moss's character in Mad Men.
Yeah. Because she's younger. Like Joan's
younger,
established.
But Joan also had a position of power, right?
Yes.
Like in the office. But Don Draper, which is John Hamm's character, sort of brought up Elizabeth Moss's character, Joan.
Yeah.
Because she was
Peggy.
Peggy, yeah, because she was a young girl just starting out in this profession.
Yeah, college graduate. Yeah,
and
exactly.
He never was inappropriate with her. In fact, he was a really good confidant to her. He hid some of her secrets.
Yes, that's right. He covered up her pregnancy and stuff.
Yeah.
And like, it's really interesting that that's what happened, because he was kind of a dog, you know, like that character is a womanizer.
Yeah.
He sleeps with his neighbor. He marries one of his other secretaries and divorces his wife, you know, like he misbehaves constantly. But not with Peggy, because he sees her as a different kind of person, I guess.
Also it's a working relationship, right?
Yes.
And she was, you know, at some points, I think, was like his right-hand woman on some of those projects.
Yeah. And she had talent, and he recognized that.
That's right. And he recognized that he can help mentor her with his vast experience. Yeah.
And we don't, you know, in The Wire doesn't have very many female characters. Kima. But she didn't need anybody's help to be good.
No, she's good as it is, yeah.
But she learns from people who have skills she doesn't have. Like she learns from Lester Freeman. She learns from her Lieutenant Daniels, right? Like she learns things and has personal growth. And she learns how to deal with her crumbling relationship from McNulty, which probably wasn't the best. But you know, that I love the characters on that show. It's so incredibly well written. It's just so complex. And it's really good. Oh, there is a new show. I don't know if you've seen this, where there's a male-female mentorship that's like a working relationship that's kind of a mentorship, kind of a supportive, egalitarian relationship. It's in The Bear.
Oh, I haven't seen The Bear.
With Carm, the head chef, and Sydney, his sous chef. And she's a woman of color, Black woman, young Black woman. And she wants to be the best. She wants to be the best possible chef she can be. And Carm as Jeremy Allen White, those biceps. Oh my God. Anyway, Sydney's beautiful too, by the way. You should watch that show.
Okay.
It's so well written. All the characters are dynamic. It's again very surprising how good it was. But they have this professional relationship where they kind of like, Carm helps her become a better chef, and he couldn't do what he's doing without her support. So it's very interdependent in a very positive
Professional way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's really, really well written. And just brilliant. So, but there aren't very many other examples I can think of. And for that reason, I think Bent is one of my favorite characters, and like a voice of reason when there isn't any other reason around.
Yeah.
And he helps her. He helps her immensely in all kinds of,
as you said in
aspects.
the beginning of when you started doing your profile on Bent, he is the one that believed in her.
Yes. Yep. He knew she could do it.
Her because she says, and that's when you talked about them going up to the top and they were overlooking Copenhagen, actually.
Yep.
And she says something like, what if I don't know how? She's talking about to lead, and she's like, what if I don't know how? And he says, you'll learn.
Yes, you'll learn how. Exactly. And honestly, how do you learn to be prime minister? You have to actually go do it.
Yeah.
It's like teaching. You can read all the books you want about pedagogy and like case studies and like curriculum planning and like policy.
You need to have your own experience.
Yeah. Until you're in a class of 24 adolescents. Do you know how many feelings that is in a day? Oh my God.
Yeah.
And you can't do it until you do it, So
but
it's
what you need, even in my current job, Amy, I talk about how great the mentorship is there.
Yeah.
The mentorship is great and the training is wonderful, but I can't know. I have to apply it and I have to do it to actually be good at what I'm being trained to do. So mentorship is everything.
Yeah. And advice is only as good as the person who listens to it.
Mm-hmm.
You either take good advice or you don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't take good advice, you might not do as well as you could if you had taken the good advice.
Yep. Yep.
And so that brings me to our next man. I believe I said Philip was the next one, right?
Sure.
Now, now we've talked a lot. We've talked at length in our previous episodes about their relationship. And we kind of gave Philip a bit of a hard time actually earlier. And we caught a little bit of feedback from listeners about that. And like, oh, of course, like that we were kind of like not really giving him his fair shake necessarily all the time. And that's probably true to an extent. But like, they have at the beginning, before she becomes PM, they have a very balanced and equal relationship. Like they have an arrangement where each person takes turns focusing on their career for like a 5-year period.
5-year term, yep.
And it was supposed to be Philip's turn when Brigitte becomes prime minister. But that kind of changes everything and throws everything out of balance. But it's not anybody's fault. It's just what happened, and he encouraged her to run. He was like, yeah, do it, run for PM. Maybe thinking that she would never win, but he's super proud when she does. When she makes excellent speeches on TV and he's watching at home with the kids, he's like, that's your mother. She can do that. And he points out how great she is to both her daughter, her adolescent daughter, and her young son. And Laura gets it. Laura starts to become politically aware through her mother and through her kind of friendship with Kasper, actually. But I'll talk about that when I talk about him specifically. And so when Brigitte becomes prime minister, her attention is so divided. Of course it is. How could it not be? You're running a country. You're handling crisis after crisis. There's no, it's not a 9-to-5 job, unfortunately, for everybody, and she can't even go Christmas shopping with them. She has a hard time coordinating holidays with them. She has a hard time spending time with the kids. Like all of the responsibility kind of falls onto Philip very suddenly. And this throws the balance of their relationship off. I think while it was more egalitarian and their kind of your turn, my turn arrangement was actually functioning properly, that everything worked like a machine. And like, he was able, that's fine. Like, yeah, we'll focus on you. We'll focus on me. We'll focus on you. We'll focus on me. We're both here in equal part. And when that balance became unequal, it became really difficult for him to handle. And as I can actually see the reality of that now that I've actually explained that out loud. It makes more sense to me that he had trouble dealing with it. Even though previously we'd been talking about like, well, of course she can't be there 100 all the time. She's the freaking PM. Like, what can you do?
Yeah.
Both things are true at the same time. He as a character, he struggled to deal with that imbalance, and that's completely appropriate. Actually, I think that's a fair response. But also, I think maybe it's just because of the way I watch the episodes. Like, you don't necessarily get, now that we have like streaming services and you don't have to wait a week to see a show. Like, remember that? Remember when we used to wait a week to see a show?
So retro.
That's so it's so retro. And there were like ads. Remember, that's just crazy. Like, that's like once when I explained to kids, if I wanted to take a phone call, I had to be at home in the right room by the right wall. And they were like mystified. They were like, why? So it's so funny. It was so funny. But what was I saying? Oh my goodness.
You're talking about how this is a very real reaction that Philip had, as good of a guy he is. And I agree, Philip is a good guy. And yes, we do talk about Philip a lot, especially in the previous podcast episodes that we've recorded. He is a good father and
very good. Yeah.
He's not one of these men that we just talked about in our bonus episode we released.
No.
Called The Women of 2023. He is the dad that is not counting favors with Brigitte. He is doing everything he can for his children. He's an excellent father. And I always joke and say, if I wanted to be a mother, I would choose Philip as my co-parent. And also the genes are pretty good.
Pretty good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I don't fault him for that. I fault him for bailing too soon.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. But it's hard for us as viewers of the show because they happen so sequentially and like we stream them. It's hard to get a sense of like how much time passes, but it does seem that their relationship breaks down within the first year of her being the PM.
Yes.
Which is kind of fast to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it took Sophie and Justin Trudeau like 8 years to I'm like, dude, you could have tried a little harder.
PM, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for their relationship to break down during the prime ministership
point of separation.
Yeah. And by the way, like, on a human level, that sucks. Divorce sucks. It sucks.
Yeah, and that's why I talked about my reaction to our prime minister separating from his wife in the previous episode is that, on a human level, first of all, I sort of panicked, like, oh my gosh, is he going to be okay? Is he going to be able to do his job? But then I also thought, oh gosh, this is so sad for someone to have a breakup, right? And to have a relationship end.
And to have to do it in public.
Yeah. And to have 3 children because they've got 3 kids, right?
Yeah.
And the kids are older, right? They're like, I don't know, 17 and I don't know, maybe 14 and 6 or something. Like they're quite young. They're not out on their own.
No, not quite yet. Yeah. That is the one criticism, like my strongest criticism of the writing of Philip's character is that he does kind of give it up a bit too quick. However, once they're separated, even though he finds a new romantic partner very quickly, which I think Brigitte could have done if the positions had been reversed, if he was the leader and she was the one, who was like left kind of thing, like left by the job took Brigitte away, nothing else.
Yeah.
So left hanging kind of thing. Even though that happens, they discuss everything. He's always there for the kids. He's on time. When Laura has her anxiety attacks and everything, he's at doctor's appointments. He's at the hospital. He helps Brigitte cope with that. They're very, very kind to each other. Yes. There's that one argument they have that gets kind of scary, but like, that's so realistic, and like nobody meant to hurt anybody. That wasn't like abusive violence. It was
No,
like
and
grief.
I also believe that he is a true and honest friend to
Yes.
and we see that in season 3. We see him in Power and Glory just a little bit. They obviously like each other as
Yes.
as friends.
Yes,
And I
as
think
people,
that's
yes.
a mark of a good partner too. Like if you break up with your partner, it's amicable, let's say, and you both decide, we've come to an end with each other, but I value you.
Yep.
We co-parent, but on top of that, I value you as a person and I want to still be in your life. And I think they're lucky to have had that end result with each other.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
friendship.
Yeah. And it's very important, they make a point of keeping the peace for the sake of the kids too. Like, and when, when Philip has a new partner, they discuss how and when the kids should meet her.
Yeah.
Like, it's all very properly taken care of. And it's very mature writing. They act like grown-ups.
Yeah.
They like handle it in the best way possible. I don't know if it's idealized. I've never co-parented with anyone. But I've split with someone who I've stayed friends with for sure. If we had kids, I think we would have been able to work it out amicably too. Like and having children forces you to kind of be closer, as long as you're not like, crazy and full of animosity or like it's and by crazy, I mean like, really angry at each other, or it's a very abusive situation, or there's something off. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it wasn't that they didn't want to be together anymore. It's that like, there was no time for the relationship. The relationship got pushed out by Brigitte's relationship to Denmark.
Yeah.
So, but he's a good boss. He's a good lecturer, even though, he has close relationships with the students. And even though Brigitte thinks he's cheating with that one student, he's not. That part was kind of like off the hook craziness on her part, but it made sense, like nothing. It
made sense, but I also think it represents all of us. If we are in love with someone, reactions are not thoughtful
rational
sometimes.
Yeah.
They're not rational, right? You go on instinct mode. And the instinct, if you think you're being cheated on, is to sort of defend yourself and find out like what is going on.
Yes.
Right. And she acted, I think, the way many of us would act, whether we bring our car with our bodyguard to this girl's apartment, or if we start, looking on social media to see who this girl is and how frequently are they together and where did they go and what are they doing, right? We all have that, no matter if we're the PM and we've got, we were established in our lives and we're older or whatever, we still have that gut reaction. It's very human.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, of course. And it made sense, but I again, it's a credit to the writing of the show that like, and the acting, that, they move past that. They're focused on the children together. And Philip continues to be a good friend and mentor, like throughout the whole series. And and it's just, it's a relief to see, like in some American shows, like male-female relationships are so stereotyped and like overwrought and melodramatic. There's no melodrama in their relationship. There's drama, but it's like real. Like it's again, like realistically portrayed. It's maturely written. It's well handled,
Yeah, there's nothing outrageous like a soap opera plot in here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's all very, I think, natural, what they go through, their feelings. And, as we see in Power and Glory, Philip is still friends with Brigitte, present, and he's still parenting. I think there was a scene when I think he tells Laura, who we don't see a lot of in Power and Glory, oh, send me your paper, I'm going to look at it for you. Like he's always a constant, very positive force and excellent father in the lives of the kids.
Yeah, and as in Power and Glory, we haven't discussed it yet, in our episodes or anything, but there's some Magnus has some growing pains and some issues that he's dealing with, and Philip's there for that too.
Yeah.
Right. Like he is present. He never drops the ball as a dad, ever.
Mm-hmm.
As a husband, kind of, as a partner to Brigitte, kind of, but maybe she also wasn't paying enough attention to him. Like they have a very intimate relationship. We see them like kissing each other and like being physical with each other, and like they're physically intimate, and then later she doesn't have time for him, and
But
that
I
can be
also
really
think
harmful.
It's really real though, because
Yeah, very.
think about it. I'll talk about, my life from now I'm over 40, but how I am at over 40 was different than how I was at 30 and how I was
Sure.
at 20, and how in
Oh,
my
yeah.
head I define partnership or wanting to be close to someone. It's very natural in any marriage, whether you're madly in love in the beginning, that is going to fade. You
Yeah.
evolve as a person. And if it doesn't work out anymore, then you need to move on from each other. And if you can do it in the way that Philip and Brigitte did, I think it's golden.
Yeah. Again, a show for grown-ups, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not a teen drama for sure. And it does take, it takes an angle where the idea that two adults have their own issues and like need to function together kind of falls apart, right? And they can't make it function anymore because something gets thrown out of balance. And I think they just handle it so well, and it's really impressive. And I really like the actor who plays Philip. I think he's really good in his role.
Mm-hmm.
And what a great pair. Like talk about a star couple. Like they both, like they're movie star people, of all the like, of course, actors, yes, they're generally chosen partly for their appearance. Like Pilo Asbeck is kind of a heartthrobby guy. The Philip is, there's this general kind of like, especially in American TV more so, like everybody has to be good looking, like, Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. My favorite. He's Knuff.
Yeah, and he's Canadian.
I know, of course he's Canadian. There's a bunch of Canadians in the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
It was so good. It was so good. And like I remember Greta Gerwig said something about, was it Greta or was it Margot Robbie said like, oh yeah, the Canadians, like they're just so positive and nice. And I'm like, there you go, that's us. And fun. She's like, they were fun to be around. It was so fun. Yeah, it's so good. And so Philip, like, he does his best. And I think he's also aware that it's like painful to fail, that the marriage failed. It's painful for him and painful for her. But, their relationship doesn't end, it evolves.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think I'll say it, I think they're really lucky it ended like that.
Yeah. And again, he never condescends to her. He never diminishes her ambition. He never diminishes her professionalism or her skill at her job. He's just like, I feel left out. And I think that is a really interesting take as well. Like, there's not a lot of instances where men are horrible to women in this show. I mean, okay, Lagerson, yes. Torben, sometimes you're going to talk about
not
him.
To the level that we're used to seeing in other types of TV series or movies,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
there's still boundaries with them. And, I think Lagerson will be the way he is to anyone. I mean, we see him being terrible to Höxenhaven, which I'll talk about in the next episode we record. But
yeah,
I just think it's not a gendered thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so Philip never diminishes Brigitte's professionalism or her intelligence or anything. He's never what's the word I'm searching for? Dismissive of her or diminishing to her. And neither is Kasper. And so Brigitte has two advisors, right? Well, three. Philip doesn't advise her on politics as much as Bent and Kasper does, but Kasper is her other advisor. And he's a completely different personality than the other two. Like Bent is, the voice of the moderates. He is moderation. He shows moderation all the time. He is the voice of reason. He's very stable. And then you have Kasper, who's like the young firebrand, right? He's the youngest character of the men I'm just talking about. I think he might be one of the younger characters. He and Katrine are like the ones that aren't children, are like the younger characters on the show. And, he's got a lot of skill. He knows exactly how to spin things because that's his job. He understands how things play out in the public eye. And he is very, very good at his job. And when he gets sacked by Brigitte, oh my God, I can't even remember what he did. Oh, it's because of the receipt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's actually trying to cover up for Katrine's affair with the guy who dies, Ole, at the beginning of the series.
Very beginning of
episode
of season 1, episode 1. Yeah.
Yeah. And he doesn't want it to be known that, she has this affair with that guy, but then he has the evidence about Hesselbo's wife's spending
shopping habits.
Yeah. Shopping problem on the state credit card, basically.
Yeah.
And that's where he gets the receipt, and he lies about that, and that's what gets him in trouble. And then when Jakob Cruz, I think, is the one who replaces him, right? He's no good.
Doctor, no, it's not Cruz. It's someone else.
But like another young kind of
really
like
tall guy.
Really tall guy, yeah. But
that's
he can't,
not very eloquent and
he can't
handle a situation properly.
Yeah, he can't handle the situation, and so he gets done, and Kasper's back in the fray, right? Yeah. And he learned his lesson too by he knows he was unethical and crossed the line, and he also accepts that decision. He doesn't throw a tantrum,
right? And he doesn't demean her. And actually, nope. Are you in your Kasper profile now? Did you?
No, this is all from memory. I have it beside me, but I'm not looking at it.
Okay. But I will say about Kasper, even in his personal relationships, I know he's like the bad boy that can't settle, but I have never interpreted his interactions with these women as anything misogynistic and nasty.
Yeah, no, it's pure attraction. He's like, I like you.
Yeah, but even when he went to live with that woman, I forgot her name now, that had that really beautiful apartment that
the journalist?
I'm not sure what
political analyst or something. She's an analyst of some kind.
Anyways, he tried to her, and Lotte, I think her name is. Yeah. So I mean, I didn't see him acting in a chauvinistic way to put her down or try to put his, masculinity over her. It was never anything about that at all.
No, it's all about him and his personal demons, which are many, Yeah. And that's another interesting aspect of this character, that they chose a male character to have suffered this childhood sexual abuse. It's not usual that they showed this. It's interesting that it was the father, they chose male on male abuse. Not female on male abuse, which also exists. Mm-hmm. I know someone who went through that. And, we know that Kasper has these intimacy problems and struggles with anger. Sometimes he has angry outbursts.
Yeah.
And I think it's all rooted in that experience, right? And again, kudos to the writer and to the acting job on making that believable. And when it comes, he actually is able to kind of, I think, sort of address that when he tells Katrine his big secret. Mm-hmm. That's a very healing act. And when he gives Laura advice on, I had problems too, and I turned out okay, kind of, and he kind of jokes about it. And she's like, well, how did you get better? And he said, who says I'm better?
Yeah.
And he accepts that he's kind of broken. And he tells Katrine that he's like, I have problems with relationships. There's something wrong with me, But at the same time, again, we see a character who becomes a father with Katrine, right? They have a son together.
Mhm.
And he does his best to be there for his kid too.
Yeah,
He's not as good he's as good at it as Philip is,
right.
but also they're not in a stable relationship. They're not in a marriage.
No, they're not in a relationship. But I again, credit to the character of Kasper and also for being a good man. I don't think he ever flexed his career or timelines over Katrine to say, no, I can't pick up Gustav. I can't do this. I can't do that. It seemed to be as
no more than
agreeable.
yeah, no more than she's not able to take care of him sometimes.
Right.
Like they have the same kind of career pressures.
Calls her and says, she calls him and says, I need you to watch him. It's never this, well, I'm more important than you, so no, cancel your stuff.
Yeah,
it's
never.
A great representation of men on this show.
Yes.
And of being a good male partner in a romantic relationship and being good fathers.
Yes, or at least the best you can be, right?
Yes, with
in a
the
given
circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, and with like Kasper has difficulty dealing with long-term relationships because he has intimacy issues because of his abuse, right? Yeah. Philip's issues are completely different. But the advice that Kasper gives to Brigitte is usually correct. It's usually spot on, and he certainly gets her out of complicated situations. He's also instrumental in the peace talks. He's instrumental in like crisis management.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like even the way their divorce is handled is partly because of Kasper's handling of it. And also, he and Katrine have this on again, off again romance relationship, but it never interferes with their professionalism, except for that one incident at the very beginning where Kasper tries to save Katrine from public humiliation, basically. Right. And like her job. And he advises her to get her abortion because he knows that will be problematic for her career. Right. Mm-hmm. In the when she's pregnant from Ole's baby, but he dies. Like she can't manage on her own like that. And then later she ends up managing on her own anyway with Kasper's help.
Yeah, when she's a bit older, right? Because I think there's a few years 2.5 years that passed from season 2 to 3. But here's another great example of a man in Kasper is that he doesn't mansplain and explain to her, no, abortion is wrong. You should keep it. It's your role. It's natural. It's this, it's that. He leaves
how can you expose yourself to this public humiliation? Don't you know better than to like get pregnant
he never pulls rank on her, and he offers her solutions. That's his job. He's a spin doctor. He offers Brigitte solutions constantly, which are usually right. And as a friend and sometimes boyfriend to Katrine, he's offering her his honest opinion.
Yes.
Right. And it's never demeaning or insulting to her at all. It's always out of his best heart and interest.
Yeah. He's always trying to put the interest of the person he's trying to help at the forefront.
Yes.
And it's
with women, a lot of men may not do that. They don't want to give women solutions or have them go, quote unquote, against the grain.
Yeah. Oh, and they do want to give you solutions. They just think that you can't decide for yourself what those solutions should be.
Yeah, with your own body.
Yeah, or your mind or anything else, right?
Yeah.
But Kasper, even though, I mean, it's his job to give advice, and he and Brigitte often negotiate how things will play out, and she never diminishes him for his age. She never says like, what do you know? You're just a young kid, well, he's not like a freshman on the job.
No, he's probably late 20s, like 28.
Yeah, or early 30s.
Yeah.
By the middle of the third season or whatever. Yeah. And so, she depends on him, and she's able to, they're able to have this working relationship. And of all the, he dogs around again, like remember the woman, who has the scandal with the underwear modeling, Remember her?
Oh, yes.
Sophie, I think
I
it was her name,
remember.
Sophie.
No,
Yeah.
you're talking about Sophie Lindencrone,
Oh,
which is a politician. It's not her. It's
yes.
Clickguard.
Yeah, that's right.
Henrietta
Yeah.
Clickguard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And he, he's flirting with her and he tries to like put the moves on her and she like clocks him immediately. Like, how many times did you really need to drop your pen? Like,
Yeah, and he listens. He doesn't force
yeah,
his way and say, "No, I'm handsome. I need you. I want you."
yeah,
What is it going to take for me to get you? He's
yeah,
not forceful. He's just like, I mean, like anyone. You like someone, you flirt, you want them to pay attention to you, but if they say no or they're not into it, then you drop it.
yeah. And he has his affairs with different people. Like Katrine finds the bra and makeup brushes in his apartment.
In
And
season
he's
3,
like, yeah, in season 3, we don't meet that woman. We don't know who she is, but he's like, well, yeah, I have people in my life. And but he never crosses the line with Brigitte, even when she's divorced and like hitting the driver, getting it on with the unfortunate Kim, the driver, who's so
Yeah, and
helpful.
he never judged her for that, right? And I know there was a lot of reaction I was reading online about should Brigitte have done that, had an affair with the driver, but
why not?
We're all human, and when we
Yeah.
go through terrible times, maybe to have some intimacy with someone else is a way to enjoy yourself and release
Yeah.
yourself from everything you've got going on in your head. And when she calls him the next day to say, "Oh, I need a ride," and he says, "Well, Kasper's already at work," and he's like, "Well, where's Kim, the driver?" And she said he never judged her for her behavior or implied, "You're a woman, you shouldn't be acting like this."
Yeah, he just took care of it. Like he just cleaned up the mess, which is what he's supposed to do professionally. That's Kasper's job, right?
Yeah.
To like tidy things up, and that's what he does. And I think also it's interesting that he is respected by the journalists as well. Like he eventually ends up having that show on TV1 with Torben, where they discuss politics, right? Like that's his new job in season 3. And it shows that like, his character is growing up a little bit, maybe in like professionally growing, and he's continuing to use his knowledge to like, and political savvy to like make an impact on the public, which is quite interesting. It's like he has that ability, but he never runs for politics himself. Like he never goes into the fray himself, probably because he knows maybe his personality isn't morally upstanding enough to manage to be a public figure like that.
Yeah, or he doesn't want to. Some people are just good at, take singers, for example. I mean, someone might be really good at singing, but they're not good at songwriting or playing instruments, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Kasper is complex. He's dynamic. That's another thing I really like about the writing on this show is characters evolve over time. Like they don't remain static, and they adapt and change to the circumstances that they find themselves in from year to year and season to season on the show. And that's super important as a viewer, to make it worth watching. You don't want to watch the same character make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah,
necessarily. I mean,
your growth and development.
Yeah. If you're that kind of viewer, which I happen to be. I mentioned The Bear earlier about mentorship, and that's another program where the characters are super dynamic. There's like personal evolution, and it's really interesting how it's done. Jamie Lee Curtis is in that show. She plays the mom.
Oh, is she?
Oh yeah, it's really good performance. It's really good.
Wow, I will check it out.
Yeah, it's worth watching. It was thoroughly enjoyable. There was a little bit of hype about it, and then I was like, I watched it, and it's just about more than it appears to be. Just like Borgen is about more than it appears to be, or The Wire is about more than it appears to be.
Yeah, right now I'm watching Succession.
Oh yes. Yeah.
So I'm halfway through. I just ended season 2, and yeah, I was thinking in my head that might be a good show to talk about when we get to Power and Glory, about
Yeah.
Brigitte's power and this never-ending thirst for wanting more than you need or more than you have, which is what we see our characters in Succession constantly do.
I've watched a few episodes of that, and then I stopped watching it, and I don't know why I stopped. I'm not sure, but I think I need to give it another shot.
I like it a lot, and I have a friend of mine, and we discuss it. We do voice clips to each other on WhatsApp, and every time I watch a couple episodes, I voice her and she voices back. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out then, because I think it would be worth doing.
Yeah.
And as for my 3 men, the 2 advisors and the husband, ex-husband, I think I've said everything that I wanted to say about them all. I think we've kind of got it in the bag. So
I think so. One thing you forgot to mention though is you did cover a bonus episode about Kasper on season 2 of our podcast.
Yes.
So if listeners, and I know there's a lot of fans of Kasper out there, a lot, and I know many people were not happy that he was not in Power and Glory. But if you want to hear more of Amy's breakdown about Kasper, check out our episode on the Borgen podcast in season 2 of our recordings.
Yes, and it's about him and his specific situation and how that's handled in the show and by the character. And because I just think it was such an interesting storyline, and so meaty, really. And he did, like, what a good acting job to play this kind of slick, confident, hey, kind of character who's got, by all appearances on the surface, everything is pulled together and is a real pro at his job and like in the thick of it, always has a good answer for things, but his personal life, complete disaster, Yeah. It's really interesting. And it's really interesting that someone who changed his name and kind of hid that part of his identity now is a PR person. So he has to change the narrative for the public when it's not, when the bare truth won't quite work.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
he's an interesting connection.
He's a chameleon. He can change and shapeshift to survive. And that's what he does with Brigitte. Every time she's down in some problem or anticipation of a problem, he's the one that can think it out and advise her or write a speech for her or protect her.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, correct. And I think that covers the 3 men I was going to talk about. And then in your episode, you're going to talk about another 3 men.
Yeah, so in the next recording, I'm going to talk about Höxenhaven, Torben, and Jeremy. So that's going to be coming up next. And I can take us out of this one and say we'd like to thank our listeners for joining us in this episode. You can check us out on our website, theborgenpodcast.com, where all of our podcast episodes are archived and you can learn more about us in the show. We'd like to thank our good friend Garth Jensen for providing the intro and outro music. Thank you very much, Garth. And check out Garth's new YouTube channel called Garth's Pop Culture O. And lastly, don't forget to check us out on social media and subscribe to us so you know when new episodes are released, and reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you by writing to us at hashtag #TheBorgenPodcast or by sending us an email to theborgenpodcast@gmail.com.